Welcome to Crime Chronicles Confidential, where we don't just tell crime stories. We take you deep into the heart of betrayal, obsession, and the chilling consequences of misplaced trust. Tonight's story is not about strangers or shadowy figures lurking in the dark. It's about those we hold closest, the ones we laugh with, live with, trust with our deepest fears. Twin brothers. A 13-year-old adopted sister. And a secret so disturbing, it didn't just destroy a family. It exposed the darkest corners of human nature. What happens when love becomes possession? When protection turns into control? When two seemingly perfect brothers shatter the innocence of the one person who called them family? This is not fiction. This is real. And by the end of it, you'll question just how well you really know the people you call your own. It was supposed to be just another quiet evening in the small, picturesque town of Elmridge, a place tucked between rolling hills and whispering woods, where life moved slow, predictable, and peaceful. The townspeople knew each other by name. Children rode their bikes through the narrow streets, neighbors exchanged pies over fences, and doors were left unlocked. Because why wouldn't they be? Evil didn't live here. At least, that's what everyone believed. But on a late October night, the kind of night when fog curls around the trees and the moonlight flickers through shifting branches, that peace was shattered. Not with a bang, not with sirens, but with a scream. A scream so sharp, so raw, it sliced through the silence like a blade. It came from a modest two-story house on Hawthorne Lane, home to the Darcy family. Neighbors would later recall hearing that scream. Some thought it was a fox, others a nightmare echoing from a dream. But for one mother, that scream was the sound of her world collapsing. At 2:13 a.m., a frantic 911 call came through. My daughter, she's not in her room. Her window's open. There's blood on the sill. Please, please, someone help. Within minutes, flashing lights lit up the quiet street. Police cars, an ambulance, detectives in unmarked vehicles, all converging on a house that, until tonight, had never been more than a dot on the town map. The girl's name was Laiba, 13 years old, adopted just 4 years ago by the Darcy family. A quiet, intelligent child with wide eyes and an even wider heart. Everyone who met her described her as gentle, curious, and a little shy but always kind. She wasn't just a daughter to her parents. She was a little sister to the family's twin boys, Zayan and Ayan, both 17, both admired in school, both considered the pride of their neighborhood. But that night, something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. Her room was found empty, the bedsheets slightly rumpled as if she had left in a hurry or had been taken. A small trail of blood led from the edge of her bed to the open window. Outside, faint footprints in the dirt, small, likely hers, mixed with larger, heavier ones. Investigators noted the disturbing pattern. She hadn't run. She had walked, or more likely had been led. The room was eerily still. A bookshelf lined with novels, a framed photo of her with her adoptive parents, a star map pinned above her bed, as if she had been searching for a way to escape, long before this night ever came. Detectives combed through the house. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, no broken locks, nothing to indicate that an outsider had breached the safety of the home. And that's when the first chilling realization set in. Whoever had taken Laiba knew her, knew the house, knew when to strike. And most terrifying of all, might have been inside with her all along. The town awoke the next morning to news that would rip apart its quiet image. A child was missing, from her bed, from inside her home. And as police questioned neighbors and friends, and reporters circled like vultures, whispering rumors started to spread. Could it have been a kidnapping? Was it a runaway case gone wrong? Or was it something much darker? No ransom note, no signs of a break-in, no leads, just silence, a hole where a young girl used to be. But while the rest of the town speculated, Laiba's mother was left staring at her daughter's empty bed, clutching her pillow, inhaling the last of her scent, praying that the nightmare was just that, a nightmare. Zayan and Ayan, her older brothers, sat in the living room, faces pale, voices low. They told the police they hadn't heard anything that night. They claimed they were asleep, that they didn't know anything. But detectives, trained to sense tension, noticed something in their eyes. Not fear, Not grief. Something colder. Something hidden. And it was only the beginning. Because as the investigation dug deeper into the lives of the seemingly perfect family, they would uncover a truth so unsettling, so deeply buried, that it would leave even the most hardened officers shaken. And Laiba's fate would soon become the town's darkest secret. From the outside, the Darcy family looked like the kind of family you'd see on front of a community magazine. Two successful parents, twin teenage sons, and a bright young daughter who had completed their circle. Zayan and Ayan, identical twins with striking features, top of their class, athletic, articulate, and admired by teachers and peers alike. Wherever they went, people turned to look. They were the golden boys, inseparable, always finishing each other's sentences, and always ahead of the curve. And then there was Laiba, 13 years old, adopted at the age of 9. But you wouldn't have guessed it if you saw the way she clung to her mother's hand or beamed when the twins called her their baby sis. To the community, the Darcys had done something noble. They had opened their hearts and home to a girl who had known nothing but instability and loneliness before them. They gave her a room of her own, enrolled her in school, and introduced her to a world where bedtime stories replaced shouting and warm meals replaced hunger. For 4 years she thrived, or so it seemed. Family photos captured birthdays, vacations, laughter. Zayan, Ayan, and Laiba grinning in Halloween costumes. A selfie of all three baking a cake. A candid shot of Laiba asleep on the couch. A comic book open on her chest while the boys sat beside her. Heads leaned in like protective brothers. But photographs, as beautiful as they may appear, don't speak. They don't tell you what happened after the camera flashed. They don't reveal the silences between dinner conversations. They don't whisper the thoughts that sit behind smiles. And this family, so perfect in appearance, was hiding something. Laiba, once excited and bubbly, had become quieter over time. Her teachers noted she rarely raised her hand anymore. Her writing, once filled with wonder, had become darker, introspective, sometimes even fearful. In one essay, she wrote about a cage that looked like a castle. At the time, no one understood what she meant. Now it sends chills. At home, the parents, busy with careers, believed all was well. They chalked her quietness up to adolescence. After all, teenagers change, they said. They become private. It's normal. But Laiba wasn't just a teenager. She was a survivor of abandonment, of being passed between foster homes, of a childhood filled with more questions than comfort. She was still learning what it meant to belong, to feel safe, to trust, and she had trusted the twins. Zayan was a quieter one, studious, observant, and often lost in his own world. Ayan, on the other hand, was magnetic, charming, funny, and just a little too intense. He had a way of making people feel special, like they were the only person in the room. To Laiba, they weren't just brothers. They were her world, her protectors, the ones who taught her how to ride a bike, helped her with homework, played video games with her for hours. When the nightmares from her past crept in, it was Ayan who sat at the edge of her bed and told her everything was okay. When she felt left out at school, it was Zayan who helped her build confidence again. They were everything a little sister could hope for. But even love has shadows. And sometimes those shadows grow silently. Zayan had started withdrawing, not just from school or his friends, but from Laiba. He stopped joining their movie nights, skipped family dinners. When asked, he'd simply say he was tired or overwhelmed with assignments. But there was something else, something unsaid, lurking in his gaze whenever he looked at Ayan or Laiba. And Laiba, she had started locking her bedroom door at night. At first, her mother thought it was just part of becoming a teenager, needing privacy. But then came the sleepless nights, the nightmares, the whispers she'd mutter in her sleep. She's not happy. One of her teachers confided to a counselor. She tries to smile, but it doesn't reach her eyes anymore. Still, no one imagined the truth, because the Darcys were the ideal family. Because Zayan and Ayan were the dream sons. Because Laiba had been rescued from a broken past. Surely she must be grateful. But the reality was more complex. The family dynamics weren't just off. They were rotting beneath the surface. Ayan had grown possessive, not in a way that raised alarms, but in subtle, chilling ways. He needed Laiba's attention, her loyalty. He was always there, always watching. Sometimes too closely. He'd correct her when she spoke wrong, tease her for spending time with others, guilt-trip her into confiding in him and only him. And Zayan? He noticed. He tried to intervene. He tried to speak to his parents, once, maybe twice, but they brushed it off. Ayan is just protective, they said. He loves her. But Zayan knew better. He saw the control, the manipulation. He saw Laiba shrinking. And yet he stayed silent, because breaking the illusion of a perfect family takes more courage than most can muster. But illusions don't last forever. Behind the picture-perfect frame, the cracks were growing, and soon they would shatter, revealing the truth in all its horror. A truth that would leave a young girl gone and two brothers bound together by guilt, by silence, and by something far worse. Laiba's room was still, too still. The pastel-colored walls, the galaxy-themed posters above her bed, the stuffed animals lined up with almost surgical precision. All looked untouched. But to seasoned detectives, stillness was never peace. It was silence holding its breath, waiting to be heard. As officers swept through the room, they moved slowly, carefully. Every corner was examined, every drawer opened, every shelf dusted for prints. Nothing appeared out of place at first glance. But then something caught their eye, a small notebook, tucked neatly beneath her pillow. Not hidden, but not in plain view either. Almost like she had wanted someone to find it. Eventually, it was a diary, bound in soft fabric, faded at the edges, a worn lock long since broken. Its pages, filled in tiny, looping handwriting, held more than memories. They held fear. Detective Sarah Haniff, a lead investigator on the case, was the first to flip it open. She expected scribbles, doodles, the usual preteen musings about crushes or pop songs. What she found instead stopped her cold. The very first page read, "If I disappear, please read this." It wasn't dated. It wasn't dramatic. But it was deliberate. The pages that followed unraveled a world that no one in the Darcy household, or perhaps no one willing to look closely, had ever truly seen. Laiba wrote about feeling out of place, about feeling watched, not in public, not by strangers, but at home. She described dreams she couldn't explain, waking up in the middle of the night and sensing someone had been in her room. Once, she woke up to find her closet door wide open, even though she remembered closing it before bed. Another time, she swore she heard whispering, not from the hallway, but right outside her window. 3rd floor, no balcony. But the diary didn't just dwell in fear. It pointed fingers. She never wrote names. She was too careful, too scared. Instead, she used initials. Z doesn't talk to me like before. He avoids me now. Maybe he knows what he is doing. It got angry again today. He says I shouldn't tell anyone about our conversations. He says they won't understand our bond. Sometimes I feel like I'm not a sister anymore, just someone being studied, tested. As detectives flipped through the pages, the narrative grew darker, more fragmented. In one entry, she described a moment when she found her bedroom door slightly ajar, even though she distinctly remembered locking it. She wrote that when she confronted A about it, he laughed, said she was just imagining things. But the next night, she found one of her drawings ripped in half, laid neatly on her pillow. No explanation. No one else admitted to doing it. Another page was stained, possibly with tears, where she wrote, "I think I made a mistake trusting him. He used to protect me. Now I feel like he owns me." Detectives were struck not just by the content, but by the tone. This wasn't a child seeking attention. This was a child documenting her slow unraveling, a cry for help that had never reached anyone, until now. The final pages of the diary were rushed, scrawled in shaky handwriting, as if written in fear, or urgency. "If anything happens to me, please check the cameras. Check the garage. He talks to someone late at night. I've seen him. I think Z knows. But he won't say anything. Why won't he say anything?" And then nothing. No closing statement. No sign-off. Just a page torn out. Detective Sarah closed the diary gently, her hands trembling slightly. The room didn't feel still anymore. It felt haunted. The diary had transformed the case. It wasn't just about a missing girl anymore. It was about a pattern of control, of manipulation, of psychological games played on a child too young to defend herself and too isolated to escape. It was no longer a question of whether someone inside the house was involved. The question now was, which brother? Or worse, was it both? One thing was clear. Laiba had seen the darkness coming. She had felt it long before anyone else did. And with this diary, she left behind a trail of fear, a trail of betrayal, a trail that might just lead to justice. If only the truth could survive the lies wrapped around it. Detectives continued to flip through Laiba's diary, page after page of handwritten thoughts, some neat and careful, others frenzied and uneven, as though written under stress. But there was one particular entry, circled in blue ink, that seemed to freeze everyone in the room. I'm scared, something doesn't feel right. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was chilling. There was something in the simplicity of the words. A rawness, a helplessness. It wasn't a child being paranoid. It was a child who knew something was coming and had no way to stop it. As they read further, the tone shifted from curious and confused to anxious and defeated. Laiba didn't mention anyone by name. Not once. Not even a single identifying word. But the shadows in her writing had shape. They had weight. She wrote about hearing footsteps outside her room at night. Not just once, but repeatedly. She wrote, "They stand outside my door. I hear breathing. I wait for them to go. But sometimes they don't." Another line sent chills through the room. "I used to sleep with the light off. Now I can't. Every time it goes dark, I feel them watching me." The detectives underlined that sentence. It matched what her mother had told them in passing, that for the last few weeks, Laiba had insisted on keeping the hallway light on, even though she used it for total darkness. The entries were dated, and a pattern began to emerge. Nearly every time her parents were away on overnight trips, the entries became more intense. She wrote about being called into one of the twins' rooms late at night for talks that made her uncomfortable, but she never explained what was said. She wrote about being told to keep secrets, about being made to promise things. And most disturbingly, she wrote about being punished for breaking those promises. One entry read, "I told Z that it was acting strange. He told me to stop imagining things. But I wasn't imagining. I was angry the next day. I think he knew I told." That line hit hard, because it confirmed something that detectives had started to suspect, that Zayan may have known something. Maybe not everything, but enough to make a choice. And his choice had been silence. The deeper they read, the clearer it became. Laiba was living in fear, not from some imagined threat, not from a ghost in a closet, but from someone inside the house, someone she saw every day, someone she once trusted with her life. She tried to remain hopeful in the beginning. She tried to believe that what was happening was just in her head, because it's easier to blame yourself than to accept that someone you love is hurting you. But over time, that hope faded. Her words became darker, heavier. "I don't know if I'm safe anymore. They say they love me, but love doesn't feel like this. I want to tell someone, but I'm scared. What if no one believes me?" Those fears weren't unfounded. Children in Laiba's position are often not believed, especially when the ones they're afraid of are seen as model sons, as perfect boys. The boys who win awards, who help their mother with groceries, who tutor their little sister after school, the kind who never raise suspicion until it's far too late. In one of the final entries, Laiba wrote something that left the entire investigative team speechless. "I'm tired of pretending I'm okay. I know I'm not. I know something is wrong. And I think they're waiting for me to stop fighting back." That line became the centerpiece of the case. Because it wasn't just a clue, it was a warning. A warning that Laiba had seen the danger coming, that she had felt it creeping closer, night after night, step after step, until it was right outside her door. And then inside it, the diary didn't just speak of fear. It screamed of isolation, of manipulation, of a girl trapped between two brothers, one silent, one sinister, and no one listening. And the word she chose over and over again I'm scared. Something doesn't feel right. They stand outside my door. To any adult, to any guardian, to any sibling, those words should have been a call to action. But for Laiba, they became her last record. A girl who once thought she'd finally found a safe home, writing night after night to a diary, because it was the only place where the truth could exist without being denied. And now, that truth was finally speaking, loud enough for the world to hear. But the question remained, would justice listen? As detectives reviewed Laiba's diary, the atmosphere in the Dartsea home began to shift. The once cooperative family, open to questioning, suddenly became guarded. The parents were distraught, but defensive. Their answers lacked clarity. Their memories seemed blurred, and timelines didn't always match. But more than that, it was the behavior of the twin brothers that truly caught the investigators' attention. Ayan, usually the outgoing, charming one, had gone eerily silent, and Zayan, the calm, thoughtful brother, had become visibly angry. Not angry in the way a protective sibling might react to a missing sister. His anger was sharp, misdirected, almost as if it were shielding something. When asked simple questions, when did you last see Laiba? Or did she seem different lately? He snapped. His responses were defensive, even hostile. He refused to make eye contact. He rolled his eyes at officers. He even accused them of wasting time chasing made-up stories. Meanwhile, Ayan sat quietly. Too quietly. His stillness wasn't normal. He looked pale, withdrawn, as if he were afraid to speak, or perhaps afraid of what might come out if he did. This contrast between the two boys stood out like a red flag. Detective Sarah Haniff noted in her report, Ayan displays signs of internal anxiety. Sweating, fidgeting, avoiding direct answers. Zayan, on the other hand, is angry, reactive, possibly deflecting. Both are hiding something, but not the same thing. The investigative team split their approach. They questioned the brothers separately. With Ayan, they tried gentle tactics, asking about Laiba's hobbies, her behavior, her moods. At first, he answered in short, rehearsed sentences. She was fine. She was quiet, but normal. We all loved her. But when asked directly if Laiba had ever come to him with fears or concerns, he hesitated. He looked down. He picked at his fingernail, then said almost too softly, she just had a vivid imagination. She used to say things, weird things. I didn't take them seriously. What kind of things? The detective pressed. Ayan paused. That someone was watching her, that she couldn't sleep. And did you believe her? Another long silence. I don't know, he whispered. Maybe. It wasn't what he said that troubled the investigators. It was what he didn't. Zayan's interrogation was different. He walked in like a wall, arms crossed, jaw clenched. His tone was combative. This is a waste of time, he said. I didn't do anything. Neither did Ayan. Laiba probably ran away. She does that. The detective frowned. She's 13. She's never run away before. Are you saying she had a habit of disappearing? Zayan didn't respond. He just stared. Did you notice anything unusual in her behavior over the last month? She was a kid. Kids act weird all the time. But she was your sister. You didn't notice anything? Zayan's voice cracked slightly. She wasn't my real sister. That sentence hung in the air like a slap. The detective leaned forward. What do you mean by that? Zayan blinked. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant she was adopted. It's not the same. But it was too late. The statement revealed something deeper, a fracture in the family dynamic, a separation, a difference in how Laiba was viewed, not as equal, not as truly theirs. Detectives began to wonder, was this about more than just one incident? Had resentment been building over time? Was there jealousy, tension, competition? Neighbors were interviewed. Some described seeing Ayan and Laiba walking together often, too often. They mentioned the way he hovered over her, corrected her in public, touched her shoulder when he didn't need to. One neighbor even said they once overheard Ayan scold her late at night in the driveway. Don't tell anyone. They won't understand. You'll ruin everything. Those words aligned too closely with what Laiba had written in her diary. And still, Zaya remained angry, not panicked, Not devastated, just angry, as if something inside him was boiling, but he didn't know where to place it. Could it be guilt? Could it be rage at his own inaction? Or could it be that he, too, had played a role? The deeper detectives looked, the tighter the circle became. There was no sign of a break-in, no reports of strangers. All roads led inward, into this home, into these brothers. And for the first time, the police said aloud what everyone else had been thinking quietly. What if the monster wasn't out there in the dark? What if he lived just down the hall from Laiba's bedroom? The investigation had moved past possibility. Now, it was about uncovering the truth hiding behind two identical faces. One silent, one angry, both dangerous in their own way. For days had passed since Laiba vanished. For days of speculation, interrogations, and uncertainty. Her parents were barely eating. The town was on edge. Volunteers had scoured the surrounding hills. Every possible escape route had been searched. Still no sign of her. And then a breakthrough, not from forensics, not from a confession, but from a machine, an unblinking witness. A single security camera mounted just above the garage door. At first, detectives hadn't paid much attention to the house's CCTV system. The cameras were old, partially obstructed by tree branches, and according to parents, rarely even functional. But one of the investigators, a young tech specialist, decided to pull all the footage anyway, just in case. And it was a good thing he did, because at exactly 2:04 a.m. on the night Laiba disappeared, just 9 minutes before her mother dialed 911 in panic, the camera above the garage captured something undeniable. The door to the side entrance of the house opened. Slowly, cautiously, out stepped Laiba. She wasn't running. She wasn't stumbling. She was walking, barefoot, in pajamas, her head slightly bowed, her body language calm but subdued, almost as if she were sleepwalking or following someone. What made the footage more disturbing was that seconds later, just out of frame, a second figure appeared, a taller one. No clear face, just a silhouette. The resolution was grainy. The person wore dark clothing and kept his shadows. They reached toward Laiba, not in a violent way, more like guiding her, and then they disappeared into the darkness together. The clip was only 22 seconds long, but it changed everything. Detective Sarah Haniff paused the footage, rewound, watched again, frame by frame. The second figure never looked toward the camera, never revealed a face, but their posture, the way they moved, was familiar, too familiar. The team studied every aspect of the figure, height, body shape, gait. It matched both brothers. That was the problem. Zayan and Ayan were identical twins, not just in facial features, but in size and movement. Either one of them could have been that shadowy figure. And that was precisely what made this footage both invaluable and infuriating. It proved that Laiba hadn't been taken by force. She hadn't been dragged or chased. She had followed someone, willingly, or perhaps obediently. But why? Why would a scared, emotionally fragile 13-year-old girl who had written pages about feeling unsafe calmly walk out of the house in the middle of the night? There was only one answer. She knew the person. She trusted them. Or she had been conditioned to obey them. Laiba's father was devastated by the footage. Her mother broke down sobbing when she saw it. But the twins? Their reactions were telling. Ayan watched the footage in complete silence. He didn't ask for a second viewing. He didn't flinch. His eyes didn't blink for the full 22 seconds. When asked if that was him, he simply said, "I don't know." Zayan, on the other hand, exploded in frustration. He denied everything. "That could be anyone," he yelled. "You can't even see the face. You're just blaming us because we're family." He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. But in the aftermath of the footage being revealed, their behavior began to unravel further. Ayan became more withdrawn. He stopped eating. He stayed in his room, rarely speaking to anyone. The air around him grew heavier, as though the weight of guilt was pressing down on him. Zayan became erratic. He lashed out, accused the police of harassment, accused Ayan of making things worse. His anger wasn't protective. It was destructive. Detectives brought in a behavioral analyst to study their responses. Her observation? One of them is suppressing trauma. The other is suppressing the truth. The footage had done what days of questioning couldn't. It placed Laiba outside the house. It proved she had left voluntarily, but not alone. It confirmed that someone in that house had orchestrated her disappearance. The remaining question wasn't who took her anymore. It was which one of the brothers was leading her into the dark. And more disturbingly, did the other one know? Because if he did, then silence had made him an accomplice. And with every passing hour, the chances of finding Laiba alive were shrinking. The camera had captured the moment she disappeared, but not what happened next. For that, the investigation had to go deeper, into the brothers' secrets, into their rivalry, and into the twisted game they'd been playing, right under their parents' noses. From the day they were born, Ayan and Zayan were inseparable, two halves of the same whole, identical in looks, inseparable in behavior, always walking the world like mirrored reflections. But beneath that symmetry was friction. At first it was subtle, disagreements over video games, different tastes in music, one brother being more popular at school than the other. Typical teenage competition. But as the years passed, those small tensions fermented into something more dangerous, something silent and smoldering. And by the time Laiba came into their lives, the rift had already begun to form. She was only 9 when she joined their family. Timid, wide-eyed, overwhelmed by the warmth she had never known in foster care. For a while, she was just a little sister, the kid they teased, protected, and helped adjust. But as she grew older, something shifted. Ayan, always a more dominant twin, began to take a particular interest in her. At first, it seemed brotherly. He helped her with homework, bought her gifts, even taught her how to play chess. But it became clear, especially to Zayan, that Ayan's attention was obsessive. He was possessive of her time. He insisted on walking her to school, on knowing where she was at all times. He grew irritated when she spoke to anyone else for too long, even Zayan. Zayan started noticing the subtle changes. Laiba, once talkative and playful around both of them, now grew tense whenever Ayan entered the room. She laughed less. She glanced nervously at him during dinner. She started spending more time alone. Zayan confronted Ayan once, a quiet conversation in the backyard. "What are you doing?" he asked. Ayan looked up confused. "What do you mean?" "You're suffocating her." Ayan didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He simply smiled, a hollow, unreadable smile, and said, "She needs me." That was the moment Zayan realized something was deeply wrong. The rivalry that had once been about school grades or who got the last slice of pizza had turned into a battle over control, over Laiba. In the weeks leading up to Laiba's disappearance, tensions between the twins reached a breaking point. Their parents dismissed it as teenage moods, boys being boys. But their arguments had changed tone. They were no longer about trivial things. They were laced with venom. According to Laiba's diary, she overheard them fighting violently. They yelled so loud I covered my ears. Z said, "You're not her owner," and they said, "You're just jealous because she trusts me more." Zayan began distancing himself from the family. He spent more time at the library, took long walks alone, started sleeping with headphones in, trying to shut out the storm brewing in his own home. But guilt weighed heavily on him. He knew something was wrong. He saw the signs. He saw Laiba shrinking day by day, and he said nothing, because for all his anger toward Ayan, Zayan feared that speaking up would tear their family apart. He didn't want to believe his own brother, his mirror image, could be capable of something vile. And yet, deep down, he knew. He knew Ayan had crossed a line. He knew Laiba was afraid. And still, he waited. That delay would cost him everything. During interrogation, when asked about his relationship with Ayan, Zayan finally cracked. He leaned forward, eyes bloodshot, and whispered. He wouldn't stop. I told him to give her space. I told him it was wrong. But he said I didn't understand. That she was special. That no one could protect her the way he could. "What did you do?" the detective asked. Zayan closed his eyes. "Nothing," he said. "I just watched." That admission changed the course of the investigation. This wasn't just a case of one twin gone rogue. It was a slow, toxic unraveling of brotherhood, a loyalty corrupted, a silent rivalry that evolved into complicity. Ayan had become the manipulator, Zayan had become the coward, and Laiba became the victim caught in the middle of their war. A war waged not with fists, but with silence, with secrets, with eyes turned away at the worst possible moments. And now, with one girl missing and the nation watching, that hidden rivalry between the twins had turned into a criminal reckoning. Because in the battle over who would control Laiba, they had both lost her. As the investigation narrowed and pressure mounted, detectives knew they had to play the twins against each other. It was a strategy used often in cases involving close relationships, and in the case of Ayan and Zayan, it was especially powerful, because while they were identical in appearance, their psychological profiles were drifting farther apart with each passing day. Ayan was the first to crack. He had remained mostly silent during early questioning, answering in half sentences, avoiding eye contact. But now, isolated from his brother, seated in a quiet interrogation room, under the gaze of a soft-spoken behavioral officer, Ayan finally spoke. His voice was calm, controlled, as if rehearsed. But what he said turned the tables. Zayan has changed, he began. He's not who you think he is. The detectives leaned in. What do you mean by that? Ayan took a breath. I mean, lately he was acting strange, especially around Laiba. He started spending more time with her. A lot more. Can you explain that? Ayan nodded. Before, he never really paid attention to her. I was the one who helped her with schoolwork, played games with her, looked out for her. But then it flipped. Suddenly he was always with her. In her room. On the couch. He started shutting me out. To be clear, the detective said, you're saying Zayan was deliberately isolating her from you? I don't know if that was his plan. Ayan replied. But that's what it felt like. There was a pause. Then Ayan added something else. Something that changed the tone of the room completely. She told me she felt uncomfortable. The detective's pen froze. Uncomfortable? How? She didn't say much, Ayan said. Just that Zayan was getting too close. Sitting too close. Talking in a way that confused her. She didn't want to upset him, but she said she felt weird. That's the word she used. Weird. Did you tell anyone? I tried to talk to him, Ayan replied, eyes narrowing. I told him to back off, to stop being so intense. But he got defensive, said I was jealous. The room fell into silence. Ayan's accusation painted an entirely new picture, one where Zayan, previously seen as a quieter, more rational twin, was now under scrutiny. And while his anger and deflection had already raised suspicions, this revelation gave investigators a new theory. Had Zayan, in his guilt, been overcompensating for something much darker? Detectives turned back to Laiba's diary for comparison. One entry stood out. Z is always in my room now. He watches me draw. He says it calms him. But sometimes I wish he'd leave. I think he's sad. But I don't know what he wants from me. Another page read. He said, I'm not like other girls. That I'm more special because I'm not really their sister. I didn't know what to say. The implications were disturbing. Was Zayan blurring emotional boundaries? Was he projecting loneliness onto Laiba? Or was he using his role as her brother to manipulate her silence? The detective's new Ayan's statement could be a strategic deflection. After all, the CCTV footage still showed an unknown figure leading Laiba out of the house, and that figure could easily have been Ayan himself. But what Ayan was doing now was planting seeds. He was turning the investigation inward, pointing fingers not just to survive, but to erase his own guilt. And yet, even in doing so, he revealed truths that couldn't be ignored. He recalled a specific moment that haunted him. One night, about a week before she disappeared, Laiba came to my room crying. She didn't say what happened, but she asked if she could sleep in my bed. I told her yes. She didn't say a word the whole night. Did you ask her why? She just said, I don't feel safe. The detective leaned forward. And you still didn't tell anyone? Ayan's expression cracked. The first real sign of emotion. I thought I could handle it, he whispered. I didn't want to break the family. And there it was, the same tragic flaw mirrored in both brothers. Silence. A failure to act when it mattered most. Whether Ayan was telling the whole truth or rewriting the story to protect himself, one thing had become clear. This was no longer about just one guilty party. This was a toxic triangle, a web of obsession, confusion, and suppressed emotion. Two brothers, one girl caught in the middle, and a story unraveling piece by piece, with each word revealing just how deep the darkness went. It was nearing the end of the second week. Leads were thinning out. Forensics had run dry. Interviews were circling back with no new revelations. The Dartsey home was still, but the walls felt heavier, darker. Something vital was still missing. Something that would shift the balance of truth. And then they found it, not buried in drawers, not saved to a family computer, but hidden on Laiba's old tablet, a device no one had thought to check. It was found by her mother, who'd been going through Laiba's things in desperation, searching for a scent, a trace, anything to hold on to. The tablet had a low battery. She plugged it in. It powered on. There was a single unsent voice message saved in the drafts of a messaging app. Time-stamped, 1:32 a.m., barely 30 minutes before Laiba disappeared. She hadn't sent it. She'd recorded it, then saved it, then, for reasons unknown, changed her mind. But it was still there, 1 minute and 43 seconds long. Detectives gathered around as the recording was played, behind closed doors in silence, with no interruptions. What they heard was devastating. Laiba's voice was barely above a whisper, shaky, breathless. It wasn't panic that came through. It was something more heartbreaking, resignation. If something happens to me, the opening line silenced the room. If I go missing or if I stop coming to school, I just want someone to know. I tried to say something. There was a pause, a long, trembling breath. I don't think anyone will believe me. They all think our family is perfect. They don't see what I see. They don't feel what I feel. Sometimes I think I'm the crazy one. Maybe I am, but I don't feel safe anymore. I tried telling Ayan. He said he'd talk to him, but I don't think it helped. Things got worse after that. The detectives exchanged glances. Ayan had claimed to protect her, claimed he was the one who noticed Zayan's behavior. But Laiba's words suggested otherwise, that after she confided in him, the situation escalated, and then came the line that would break open the case. If something happens to me, it's Zayan. It will be Zayan. There was no anger in her voice, just clarity, like she had accepted her fate. He used to be kind. I think he still is. But something is wrong with him now. I don't know what it is. He looks at me like he's not really there, like he's trying to say something but can't. I just want to go back to how things were, when I felt like I had a real family, when I could sleep without checking the lock 3 times. Her voice faltered. You could hear the tears begin. I don't hate him. I just don't understand why he's doing this. I don't want to live like this anymore. I want to feel like a kid again, like I matter, like I'm not a mistake. The recording ended with a soft click, the sound of her thumb letting go. That was it, Laiba's final message. Her voice frozen in time, a digital echo of a girl crying for help in a house too blind or too unwilling. To hear her, it changed everything. Ayan was called back in. When confronted with the voice note, he didn't speak for 2 full minutes, just stared at the table, breathing heavily, hands clenched. Finally, he muttered, I didn't think she'd record anything. Why not? The detective asked. Because she was scared. And you let her stay scared. Ayan didn't deny it. Zayan, however, was a different story. When they played him the voice note, his reaction was immediate. Denial, deflection, rage. She's confused, he said. She didn't understand what I was trying to do. I was helping her, protecting her. From what? The detective asked. Zayan slammed his hands on the table. From herself. But no amount of shouting could erase what had been recorded. The voice note was a witness, a final testimony, a piece of truth Laiba left behind, knowing it might be the only chance she had to be believed. For the detectives, it was confirmation. For the parents, it was devastation. And for the world watching the case unfold, it was haunting. A young girl, 13 years old, trapped in silence, left a single message, not asking for revenge, not cursing her abuser, but pleading to be remembered, to be seen. She didn't want justice. She wanted peace. And she never got it in life. But in death, she had finally spoken. And now, her voice would echo through every courtroom, every headline, every mother's nightmare. A child's whisper, louder than any scream. The recovered voice note from Laiba was a final push law enforcement needed. It wasn't just a clue, it was a direct accusation. If something happens to me, it will be Zayan. The name was spoken, the fear was real, and the silence that had clouded the investigation finally broke. The next morning, Zayan Darcy was arrested. It happened quietly. No media, no press conference. Officers arrived at the Darcy residence at 6:42 a.m., knocked firmly on the door, and requested Zayan come with them for questioning. His parents, pale, stunned, didn't resist. Ayan watched from the top of the stairs, emotionless. Zayan didn't ask why. He didn't protest. He simply nodded, picked up his phone, and followed them into the car. But the moment he was inside the interrogation room, his silence cracked. "This is a mistake," he said. The detective replied calmly. "Laiba said your name. That's not a mistake." Zayan leaned forward. She was confused. She didn't understand. She didn't see the whole picture. "Then help us see it," the detective said. And Zayan began to speak. Not to confess, not to break down, but to deflect, to shift the narrative. He said Laiba was fragile, said she made things up in her head, that she had episodes, that Ayan encouraged them. But the investigators were prepared. They had gone through his phone. And what they found made the case even darker. Buried in a hidden folder, locked with disguised password, not under files or gallery, but under a folder labeled homework, was a video, dated a week before Laiba's disappearance. The video was short, just over 2 minutes, but it was damning. The camera appeared to be propped up or placed on a shelf. The angle was low, capturing Laiba's room. The timestamp showed it was recorded past midnight. Laiba was sitting on her bed, drawing something in her sketchbook. Then Zayan walked in. He didn't knock. He didn't ask to come in. He sat beside her, too close. She shifted away slightly. There was no sound, but the body language was clear. She looked uncomfortable. He leaned in. She put her sketchbook down. He said something. She shook her head. He touched her shoulder. She pulled away, and then the video cut off. Detectives looked at Zayan across the table. "Explain this." Zayan stared at the screen, eyes fixed, not blinking. "I was checking on her." "That doesn't look like checking. That looks like intimidation." Zayan said nothing. "That video was hidden, password protected." "Why?" Again, silence. "Did you know she recorded a voice note naming you as the one she feared?" Zayan flinched. "I never touched her," he said through clenched teeth. "I never hurt her. But you were in her room. You filmed her, without her knowing, at night. I want to make sure she was okay." "You wanted control," the detective said, voice calm but firm. "You were obsessed." Zayan's jaw tightened. His hands trembled. "No, that's not what it was." "Then what was it?" Zayan didn't answer. And that was the moment detectives realized something critical. Yes, Zayan had been inappropriate. Yes, he had crossed boundaries. But something still didn't sit right. He was evasive, yes, but he wasn't calculating. He was impulsive, defensive, a mess of emotion and shame. It was clear he had guilt, but was it guilt for what he did, or guilt for what he didn't stop? One officer asked to rewatch the video, this time focusing not just on Zayan, but on the environment. And there, in the reflection of Laiba's window, was a shape, a shadow, outside her door, watching. Someone else had been standing there, just out of view. The footage had been taken by Zayan, but someone else had known it was happening. Someone had been watching them both. And now, the investigation shifted again. Because if Zayan was guilty of manipulation and psychological pressure, he might not be the only one involved. The question now wasn't just about Zayan's intentions. It was about who else had access. Who else had motive? And who else had secrets buried behind a carefully constructed facade? Zayan was in custody, but the real story was still unfolding. Because one truth was undeniable. Zayan had crossed a line, but the most dangerous person in Laiba's life might still be free. The video discovered on Zayan's phone was shocking, but it wasn't the entire story. Because when investigators took a closer look, frame by frame, pixel by pixel, they found something that had been hiding in plain sight, in the reflection of Laiba's bedroom window. Just for a moment, the shape of another figure appeared. Not Zayan, someone taller, standing in the hallway, watching. The video wasn't just disturbing, it was layered. There was something else. Someone else. Forensic technicians enhanced the clip, isolating the reflection, brightening the image, running it through motion detection software. And then came the moment that would crack the case wide open. The face in the reflection was Ayan's. He wasn't part of the scene. He wasn't supposed to be there. But he was watching from the shadows, silent, unmoving, and entirely aware of what was happening between Zayan and Laiba. The horror of this revelation sent a wave through the entire investigative team. Because this wasn't just a moment caught by accident. It was evidence of something premeditated, something deliberate, a hidden system of surveillance, an unspoken agreement between brothers, or perhaps something more sinister, a twisted game. The room fell into a stunned silence as the video was replayed with this new knowledge. Now, every movement took on new meaning. Laiba's tension, Zayan's proximity, Ayan's quiet presence outside the door. He had been there the whole time. But that wasn't the worst of it. When Zayan's device was fully unlocked and cross-referenced with cloud backups, investigators found a hidden folder synced to an encrypted drive, created months earlier. Inside were multiple videos, all from the same room, all taken late at night, all showing Laiba. Sometimes she was asleep, sometimes reading, sometimes simply sitting at her desk, unaware of the camera watching her from a shelf, a drawer, even the air vent above her bed. And in one of those videos, recorded 2 weeks before she disappeared, Ayan entered the room. The footage began with Laiba writing in her diary. The timestamp matched one of the most desperate entries she had ever written. She looked tired, worn out. Then Ayan walked in, quiet, calm, like it was routine. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. He just sat down on her bed. Too close. Laiba stiffened. She tried to continue writing. He took the notebook from her lap. She reached for it. He didn't give it back. The footage had no audio, but her face said everything. She was afraid, not startled, not confused. Afraid. Ayan leaned in, said something. She shook her head. She tried to get up. He held her wrist. Not hard, not violent, just enough to make her sit back down. And then the screen went black. The file had been cut off, deleted, or corrupted, but it was enough to see the truth. Zayan may have filmed Laiba, but Ayan had entered the room. He had crossed a boundary, physically, emotionally, psychologically. And if Zayan had recorded the footage, then why was Ayan in it? That question rewrote the entire investigation. Had Zayan been collecting evidence? Or had both brothers been part of something darker? One recording showed Zayan in the room. Another showed Ayan. But the placement of the camera, always the same, meant that someone had set it up in advance. Not once. Repeatedly. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. It was planned. The detectives called an Ayan. They didn't tell him what they had found. Instead, they showed him just a final frame, his face in the reflection. And Ayan froze. He stared at the screen for a long time, blinked once, twice. Then he said, "Where did you get that?" The detective replied, "That's not the question. The question is, how long have you been watching her?" Ayan didn't answer. He simply leaned back in his chair and whispered, "You think Zayan's the one who broke her, but you have no idea." There it was, the first real crack. A confession? Not quite, but something close. A slip that revealed knowledge, awareness, involvement. The horror wasn't just in what happened on screen. It was in what had been building off-screen for months, maybe longer. A pattern of control, a cycle of obsession. A game played between brothers, where Laiba was the pawn. And now the footage, once thought condemned only Zayan, had revealed a darker, more complex nightmare. That Ayan wasn't the innocent sibling trying to protect her. He was part of it. The camera had caught his reflection, but it also reflected the truth. Evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it watches, quietly, closely, and without guilt. By now, investigators were no longer asking if something terrible had happened to Laiba. That was certain. The real question was how long had it been happening, and how far had it gone? As detectives reconstructed the timeline, from Laiba's early diary entries to the video footage and statements from both brothers, a horrifying realization took shape. This wasn't a sudden act of violence. It wasn't an impulsive mistake. It was a process, carefully planned, gradually executed, and deeply rooted in psychological control. And that planning, it turned out, had begun almost a full year before Laiba disappeared. It started subtly. At first, no one noticed. A slight change in behavior here, an odd moment there. But when police accessed Zayan and Ayan's digital history, cloud backups, deleted messages, search logs, a pattern emerged. A pattern of surveillance, of boundary testing, of obsession disguised as affection. Zayan had created folders labeled study notes and assignments, but hidden within them were logs, journal-like entries, screenshots of Laiba's texts, even audio recordings of her talking in her sleep. Most of them were harmless on the surface, but the intent behind them? Anything but. Ayan's phone revealed another side, darker, colder. While Zayan documented Laiba's behavior, Ayan was actively shaping it. Text messages disguised as jokes. You should only trust me. Others don't understand you like I do. You don't need friends when you have us. Don't talk about what we discuss. People will judge you. And worst of all, a shared note between the brothers, dated 11 months prior. Title, Project, Complete Integration. It was a chilling document, filled with coded language. The note described steps to build dependency, reduce outside influences, and ensure emotional loyalty. Laiba wasn't referred to by name. She was called Subject L. Investigators were stunned. This wasn't about love, or even misguided protection. This was conditioning. Psychological grooming masked as sibling affection. And what made it worse? Their parents never noticed. Not because they were neglectful, but because the twins had been perfect. Honor students. Polite. Responsible. No one suspects evil when it wears a smile. Detectives brought in a criminal profiler who described the case as one of the most complex family dynamics she'd ever seen. These boys weren't just emotionally unstable, she said. They were methodical. One took the role of the enforcer, the other the observer. Together, they built a trap, not with ropes or locks, but with confusion, guilt, and fear. The profiler added something else. Laiba didn't vanish because of a single argument. She disappeared because a year-long psychological countdown had reached 0. That countdown included isolating her from school friends, undermining her trust in teachers, planting fear of rejection if she spoke up, creating the illusion that she had nowhere else to go. Every time she tried to pull away, one of them would reel her back in, sometimes with guilt, sometimes with affection, sometimes with quiet threats. Laiba had been suffocating under the weight of love turned into control. And finally, she broke. One final entry in her diary, dated just 3 nights before she disappeared, read, I think I know what they're doing. I think I finally see it. I wasn't part of family. I was part of a plan. She had realized too late. And now the police were racing against time, not just to bring charges, but to find out where Laiba was and if she was still alive. Because the truth wasn't just terrifying. It was coordinated, planned, and already halfway buried. The countdown had started a year ago, and now, the last seconds were ticking away. It didn't happen in a dramatic outburst. There was no pounding on the table, no breakdown of tears. The confession came in pieces, quiet, detached, as if they weren't talking about a living, breathing human being, but a failed experiment. Zayan spoke first, after hours of silence. Sitting in an interrogation room lit by a single overhead bulb, his defenses cracked, not from pressure, but from exhaustion. Not physical fatigue, but the emotional decay of secrets that had festered too long. He leaned forward, hands clasped tightly, and whispered, "We didn't mean to hurt her. Not at first." The detective remained silent, letting the words find their own weight. Zayan continued, "She was different. We saw it the day she arrived. Quiet, curious, always watching us. She didn't talk much, but when she did, she really listened. She wanted to be part of something." And then, after a pause that hung heavy, "So we gave her something to belong to." At that moment, Ayan, watching the interview from another room, was brought in. The detectives wanted them face to face. They wanted the truth to come not in fragments, but in full. The brothers sat across from each other. Zayan avoided Ayan's eyes. Ayan, calm as ever, broke the silence. "She trusted us too much." The room chilled. Ayan continued, "We taught her everything. How to dress, how to speak, what to read, who to talk to. We helped her be better. But the more we taught her, the more she started to think for herself. She started changing, questioning us, pushing back." "And that made you angry?" the detective asked. Ayan didn't blink. "It made her dangerous." Zayan spoke again, his voice weaker now. "We didn't hurt her, not physically, but we confused her. We made her feel like we were all she had. We told her others wouldn't understand her, that only we could." "You isolated her?" the detective asked. A long pause. "Yes." "You controlled her?" Another pause. Then Zayan replied, "With love, with guilt, with fear." It was the most honest thing he had said since the investigation began. Ayan remained quiet, his fingers tapping softly on the table. The detective pressed on. "Why? Why go this far? She was your sister." Zayan flinched, but Ayan responded without hesitation. "She wasn't our real sister. She was adopted. She needed guidance, structure. We gave her that, and she started depending on us. That was the point." "The point," the detective repeated. Ayan leaned back, looking up at the ceiling. "To create someone who couldn't live without us." It was the closest thing to a full confession, not a crime of violence, but of psychological domination. They had crafted Laiba's world piece by piece. Her room, her thoughts, her relationships, every boundary blurred, every fear cultivated, every decision weighed against one question. Will this make her stay loyal to us? The detective pulled out a printout of one of Laiba's diary entries. "Read it aloud. They say they love me, but love doesn't feel like this." Zayan broke. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. "She was supposed to be ours," he said. "We gave her everything, but we broke her. I see that now." Ayan remained expressionless. He didn't cry. He didn't defend himself. He simply said, "We taught her to love us, and then we used it against her." One sentence. That was all it took for the room to fall into silence again. The investigators finally understood. This wasn't about sibling rivalry. It wasn't even about one disturbed teenager acting alone. This was a system of control built by two minds, working together. One subtle, emotional, manipulative. The other cold, strategic, calculating. Together, they created a prison for Laiba, a mental and emotional cage, wrapped in the illusion of family. They called it love. They said it was protection. But what it really was possession. The most haunting part? Laiba wanted to love them. She tried to be their sister. But the love she gave was turned into a weapon, one that shattered her sense of self and left her stranded in fear. And now, with the truth laid bare, the brothers sat in silence, not as victims of misunderstanding, but as architects of a nightmare. Their final words, as they were taken back to separate holding cells, echoed through the halls. "We taught her everything, and then we destroyed her." The deeper investigators dug into the brothers' psyche, the more twisted the narrative became. Initially, Zayan appeared to be the central figure, the one who entered Laiba's room, the one she named in her voice note. But after the brothers' partial confessions, after the videos were analyzed and messages decrypted, a far more chilling truth emerged. Zayan wasn't the mastermind. He was a pawn, the true manipulator, The one pulling the strings from the shadows was Ayan. Ayan's behavior throughout the investigation had been disturbingly calm. He never panicked, never showed guilt. He gave away just enough to misdirect suspicion, always framing his actions in the language of care, concern, or protection. But beneath that calm exterior was something else, something far more dangerous. Detectives brought in a forensic psychologist to analyze Ayan's patterns, his speech, his posture, his history. Her conclusion? You're not looking at a brother who lost control. You're looking at someone who never gave it up in the first place. Ayan didn't see Laiba as a sister. He didn't even see her as a person. He saw her as a project, a subject to mold, control, study, and eventually break. And Zayan, the brother with a guilty conscience, had become nothing more than a piece on Ayan's board, a pawn that Ayan manipulated with precision, using guilt, loyalty, and emotional dependency. The files recovered from Ayan's personal drive painted the full picture, labeled L Development. The folder contained psychological profiles, journal notes, audio logs, and a digital diary, all focused on Laiba. He had tracked her moods, her reactions to praise, her resistance to commands. He had conducted experiments, pushing her boundaries to see when she would push back. One entry read, "She no longer tells Zayan anything before checking with me. Conditioning successful." Another, "She cried tonight. First time in a month. Emotional regression has begun. Z showing discomfort. May need to redirect blame." It was no longer a sibling relationship. It was psychological warfare. And Laiba was a battlefield. Ayan's notes revealed that he had grown bored of the control, bored of Laiba's emotional dependence. He wanted to escalate. That's when the final phase began, the phase I entitled Release. Release didn't mean freedom. It meant removal. In the final files created just 3 days before Laiba vanished, Ayan wrote, "Z is unraveling. Guilt will crack him soon. Ella's lost her will. She is ready. Once done, we let the system break." Detectives were horrified. This wasn't just a crime. It was a game, with checkpoints, levels, strategies, and an ending already decided. Ayan had orchestrated everything. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the surveillance, even Zayan's descent into guilt. When Zayan began filming Laiba, believing he was documenting proof or monitoring her safety, it was Ayan who had encouraged it. When Laiba began confiding in Ayan about Zayan's strange behavior, it was Ayan who reassured her not to leave, not to tell anyone, not to be afraid, because he would protect her. But that protection was poison. It kept her trapped, until finally, Ayan decided it was time to end the game. He didn't kill her with a weapon. He killed her hope. He killed her mind. He dismantled her from the inside, until she no longer fought, no longer questioned, no longer saw escape as possible. And Zayan, overwhelmed by guilt and unable to understand the depth of manipulation, helped cover the final phase, thinking he was saving Laiba from a breakdown. But it was never about saving her. It was about finishing the experiment. And the outcome? Death. Whether by physical act or psychological collapse or emotional erasure, the result was the same. Laiba was gone, and all that was left behind was the echo of her voice and the twisted archive of the brother who played God with a child soul. The game was over, but its consequences would haunt every person who ever claimed to know these boys. Because what happened to Laiba wasn't an accident. It was a blueprint, designed, engineered, and executed by the brother no one ever suspected. The courtroom was silent, not the kind of silence that comes from order, but the heavy, breathless silence that falls when pain is laid bare for all to see. When the trial of Ayan and Zayan Darcy began, the public was already on edge. Media outlets called it one of the darkest sibling crimes in recent history. A case not built on bloodshed alone, but on manipulation, mental torment, and the calculated dismantling of a young girl's spirit. But what no one expected was just how brutal the evidence would be. Laiba was not there to testify. She couldn't speak for herself, but her words, her drawings, her voice, they echoed louder than any witness ever could. It began with her diary. The prosecution opened by reading selected entries aloud. Entries filled with confusion, fear, and a slow-burning realization that she was no longer living a normal life, but trapped inside a psychological maze designed by the very people who were supposed to protect her. They say I'm lucky to be here, but I feel like I'm being watched all the time. He says I'm safe with him, but why does it feel like a cage? Then came the voice note, played in court, unedited and censored. Laiba's trembling words echoed off the walls, heard by everyone, from the jury to the press to her own adoptive parents, who sat weeping silently on the front bench. If something happens to me, it will be Zayan. There was no defense strong enough to silence that voice. And still it wasn't over. The prosecution then displayed the video footage. Carefully, cautiously, but with clear purpose. Footage from Zayan's hidden cameras. Footage of Laiba recoiling, of her being cornered emotionally, of her silently enduring what no child should have to face. Even the judge, a man who presided over decades of grim criminal trials, looked down and removed his glasses. He didn't speak for several seconds after the footage ended. When he finally did, his voice cracked slightly. This court has rarely seen cruelty delivered in such a quiet, intimate way. It wasn't a sudden act of rage. It was a long, slow erasure of identity. The defense tried. They painted the brothers as mentally unstable, claimed they were misunderstood, emotionally neglected, pressured by high expectations, that their actions stemmed from confusion, not malice, but the evidence, meticulous, undeniable, horrifying, destroyed that narrative. Laiba's world had not collapsed overnight. It had been taken from her, inch by inch, over months and years, by two brothers who made her believe they were her only safe place, while they quietly turned her mind against itself. A forensic psychologist testified on her behalf, based on her writings, her behavior patterns, and the digital records recovered. Laiba was systematically broken down, using psychological tools often associated with cult behavior. She explained to the court. She was isolated, confused, emotionally blackmailed, then reprogrammed to see her abusers as her only source of comfort. This was not sibling rivalry. It was calculated control. And then came the final blow, an unsent letter found beneath Laiba's mattress during the second property search, addressed to whoever cares. Sometimes I wonder if anyone will ever really know who I was, if they'll just call me the girl who disappeared. But I was more than that. I was curious. I was scared, but I still hoped. I still wanted to be free. I still believed someone might come for me. If you're reading this, then maybe someone finally did. No eye in the room remained dry. The letter was read in full. And for the first time, Laiba, who had been silent for too long, was heard, not as a victim, but as a voice, a child who had been emotionally cornered, psychologically abused, and mentally suffocated, but who still found the strength to write, to record, to hope. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours. The verdict? Guilty on all counts. Emotional abuse, unlawful surveillance, psychological coercion, and the unlawful confinement of a minor. Both brothers received life sentences with no possibility of parole for 30 years. But it wasn't the sentencing that mattered most. It was the truth, finally unburied, finally undeniable. Laiba's story had been dismissed, ignored, hidden behind the mask of a perfect family. But in that courtroom, her story was finally told, and the silence she once feared was broken. The courtroom doors had closed. The verdict was read. Two brothers, once the pride of their family and community, were now convicted criminals, sentenced to life imprisonment. Ayan and Zayan Darcy, identical twins, inseparable since birth, would now live out their days behind separate concrete walls, bound not by love or loyalty, but by guilt, judgment, and the irreversible weight of what they had done. The public celebrated the ruling. Headlines called it a landmark case in psychological abuse. Social media buzzed with reactions, anger, grief, and relief. Activists praised the court for recognizing emotional manipulation as a form of long-term violence. Survivors of similar abuse came forward, sharing their own stories. But amidst the justice, a question lingered. Was this truly justice? Or just punishment? Because Laiba, the girl at the center of it all, was still gone. Her laughter would never echo in the halls again. Her diary would never be filled with dreams again. Her voice, captured in one haunting recording, will be the last anyone ever heard of her. So yes, the system worked. But it had worked after it failed her. People asked, shouldn't someone have noticed sooner? The teachers who saw her silence grow but said nothing? The parents who trusted appearances more than intuition? The neighbors who saw the twin possessiveness as brotherly love? The reality was this. By the time Laiba was finally seen, it was because she was already missing. Justice, when delayed, starts to feel like ritual. Necessary, yes, but hollow. Zayan, during his final statement before sentencing, sobbed openly. He apologized to Laiba's parents, to the court, to Laiba herself, if she could somehow still hear him. I thought I was protecting her, he said, but I was just too weak to protect her from him or from myself. Ayan, on the other hand, never cried. He stood motionless, staring straight ahead. When asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, he spoke just 4 words. She was never free. Whether it was remorse, defiance, or a final admission control, no one could say. Laiba's adoptive mother gave a victim impact statement that left the courtroom in tears. I raised all 3 of them. I believe they loved each other. I believe we were a family. But love isn't what you say, it's what you protect. And no one protected Laiba, not even me. And for that, I will never forgive myself. And perhaps that was the truest tragedy of all, because the real cost wasn't measured in years served behind bars. It was measured in a child's erased future, in the pages of a diary filled with fear instead of dreams, in a voice that whispered warnings no one heard until it was far too late. Zayan would spend his sentence tormented by guilt, the boy who watched it all unfold and never stopped it. Ayan would serve his time with calculated calm, the architect of the psychological trap so elaborate, even he couldn't escape its consequences. And the world outside would move on, headlines fading into archives. But for Laiba's mother and for every person who loved her, there would always be a quiet room, an empty chair, a set of drawings that would never be finished. So is this justice? In the eyes of the law, yes. But in the eyes of a mother who lost her daughter not a moment, but over months of silence, fear, and emotional decay, there is no justice. Only memory, only loss, only the haunting question. If everyone had just listened earlier, would she still be here? Zayan and Ayan may have received life sentences. But Laiba, she received none. She wasn't just failed by her brothers. She was failed by everyone who saw something strange and chose to look away. And that truth, quiet and cruel, is a part of the story no verdict can undo. When the Dartsey family adopted Laiba at the age of 9, they gave her a room, a nameplate on the door, a school uniform, and birthday parties. They gave her a home. But what they didn't give her, at least not fully, was belonging. Because behind every smile in the family portraits, behind every caption that read, "Our world is complete," there was an invisible line, one that separated Laiba from the 2 boys who had known this house since birth. She was their sister, but only in name, not in instinct, not in loyalty, and certainly not in the way they treated her. This isn't a story of biological rivalry. It's a story about how society still, even now, often fails to understand adoption. We say, blood doesn't make a family, love does. And yet, again and again, adopted children are expected to prove their place, earn their space, and accept whatever love is offered, even if it's conditional, unequal, or broken. Laiba tried. She called them her brothers. She drew them in her notebooks. She wrote their names in glitter on handmade birthday cards. She believed deep in her heart that she finally had what every child dreams of, a real family. But slowly, over months and years, she started to feel it. The difference, not always in words, but in silences, not in what was said, but in what was not offered, the extra helping of attention, the leniency given to the boys, but not to her, the way her thank yous were praised like achievements, not natural responses of a daughter to her parents. And then there were the twins, Zayan and Ayan. She wanted their approval more than anything. She mimicked them, admired them. She called them by with affection, hoping they'd see her as their own. But to them, she wasn't blood. She was adopted, and that single word, loaded with meaning, shaped everything that followed. At first, it was harmless. Ayan taking the lead, becoming overprotective. Zayan watching from a distance, unsure how to interact. But over time, that distance became disconnect. The protectiveness turned into control. The curiosity turned into entitlement. Because deep down, they didn't see Laiba as their equal. They saw her as a guest in their family system. Someone who owed them gratitude. Someone who needed their approval to keep her place. Someone they could shape, claim, and, when they were done, discard. And this isn't just about the Dartseas. This is a reflection of how many still treat adoption. We celebrate on the surface. We smile at the photos. We like the posts. We say, how beautiful. But behind closed doors, adopted children often fight for identity, for space, for the right to just be children. They live under constant pressure to be grateful, to be good, to never cause trouble, never raise their voice, never outshine the biological kids, because they've been given a chance. Laiba was more than a chance. She was more than a cause. She was more than a rescue story. She was a human being, with thoughts, with fears, with the capacity to love deeply and endlessly. Even those who would betray her, but they didn't see that. To them, she was a blank slate, a project, a test, not a sister. Because if she had been truly seen as one, she wouldn't have been monitored. She wouldn't have been molded, manipulated, and mentally isolated. She wouldn't have been asked to earn a place that should have already been hers. So now we ask, do we really understand what adoption means? Do we know what it takes to truly bring a child into your heart? Not just your home? It's not about papers. It's not about charity. It's not about saving someone. It's about commitment, unconditional love, and treating that child in every way as your own. Laiba was not less. She wasn't a visitor. She wasn't a thank you story. She was a daughter, a sister, a child who deserved safety, respect, and a life full of dreams, not fear. And if this story haunts us, it should. Because somewhere right now, another child is calling someone by, or Ammy, hoping this time it's real. The question is, will we truly love them as our own, or will we wait until it's too late? Until the silence turns into a story we can't undo? Some stories end with resolution, some with justice, and others, like this one, leave behind a silence that lingers far beyond a final verdict. Laiba's story is not just a tale of abuse, betrayal, and psychological manipulation. It is a mirror held up to our families, to our systems, to ourselves. So, what do we learn? First and foremost, trust is a fragile thread. It takes time to weave, but only seconds to tear. Laiba trusted the people who smiled at her across the dinner table, who called her sister, tucked her into bed, helped her with schoolwork. She trusted them not because they earned it, but because she wanted to believe in something good. That trust became the very weapon used against her, because trust, when not honored, turns into a prison. And in Laiba's case, that prison was invisible, made of words, guilt, and fear. We also learn this. Monsters don't always come from outside. They don't always break in through windows. Sometimes they grow within the walls of our homes. Sometimes they were the face of a sibling, a son, a child raised in the same house, at the same table, with the same blessings. Ayan and Zayan were not strangers. They were her brothers. And it was in that sacred bond, one that should have protected her, that she was broken. Because sometimes the enemy doesn't knock. He has a key. And perhaps that's the hardest truth to accept, that those we love, those we trust, can fail us in the most unimaginable ways. But Laiba's story also teaches us something else. Silence is not safety. The signs were there. Her diary entries. Her change in behavior. Her fear. She didn't scream. She whispered. But no one listened. Not the school. Not the neighbors. Not the adults who should have asked. Why is she pulling away? Why is she quieter? What's happening when we're not looking? And that silence from her and from everyone else allowed the nightmare to continue. So the next time a child says, I'm scared, or writes something that doesn't make sense, or withdraws when they use a laugh, We must not ignore it, because every moment of hesitation could be the moment they lose hope. And finally, we learn this. Family is not a label. It's a responsibility. To adopt a child is not just to feed and clothe them. It is to rebuild trust where it was shattered, to offer love that doesn't come with conditions, to defend them even from those within your own walls. Laiba didn't need perfection. She needed protection. She needed someone to say, "I believe you." Someone to stand up and say, "What's happening isn't right." Someone to act before it was too late. But that never came. So now, all we have is this story. This echo. This reminder that love is not enough. Not without action, awareness, and accountability. Because the truth is, betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from those we call our own. And Laiba's final lesson, the one etched into every word she left behind, is that trust once broken doesn't always get another chance. So let's not wait for another story. Let this one be the one that wakes us up, that makes us ask the hard questions, that reminds us that behind quiet eyes, there can be storms. And behind smiling faces, sometimes monsters. If the story touched your heart, if Laiba's voice echoed inside you, if her silence made you think about the ones around you who may be suffering in silence, then speak. Don't let this just be another video you watch and scroll past. Let it be a conversation, a reflection, a beginning. Leave a comment. Tell us how this story made you feel. Was it anger? Sadness? Shock? A memory of someone you know? Your words matter. They might be the spark that helps someone else open their eyes. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real, raw, unsettling truths that hide beneath the surface of everyday life, then subscribe to the channel. Here at Crime Chronicles Confidential, we don't just report crime. We tell the stories behind it. The pain, the silence, the moments when one decision could have changed everything. Because behind every case, behind every headline, behind every name, there's a soul, a life, a lesson, and your voice, your engagement, helps us keep telling those stories. So tell us what you think. Suggest the next case you want us to cover, and let's keep uncovering the truths others are too afraid to face. Until next time, stay aware, stay awake, and remember, every crime has a story, and every story deserves to be heard. Only on Crime Chronicles Confidential. 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 Chronicles